Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Assessment Week, or welcome for the first time. If this is the first session that you're joining this week with us, this is day 3 of our Math Assessment and Intervention Week, and today's session is the benefits of asset-based assessment for all learners, including those with learning differences, with Gregory Trieste. Greg has done a few of these before. This is a new presentation, but he's talked with us before about students with learning differences, and I always learn something new and exciting every single time, so we are pumped to have him here today. While everyone's trickling in, have some icebreakers, the usual: where are you from, what do you teach, but what made you want to join this webinar today? So throw this in the chat. Let's get some conversations going as we all gear up for today's session. Oh, I think my housekeeping slides were in the wrong place. Okay, to make the most of this webinar, if you'd like to access closed captioning, please hit the CC button in the bottom tray and then show subtitles. You can participate and make comments at any time via the chat. You can also submit questions using the Q&A function. We will have dedicated Q&A time at the end of the webinar. So if you don't see us answering your questions right away live, we are holding them till the end, so do not worry. And you will receive a certificate of attendance with your webinar recording via Zoom in 24 hours. And you will receive it. Don't worry. I know you're going to ask another time in the chat, but you will receive a certificate of attendance and webinar recording via Zoom. And then we'll send you all the recordings sometime next week from the week. All right. And to introduce Greg. So Greg is a senior product specialist at Amplify, specializing in science and math. One second. Oh, I lost my notes. Specializing in science and math, as well as a passionate teacher with over 20 years of experience in education. His academic and research focus has been on teaching diverse learners, which is what we always love it when he talks about, and believing that learning differences are assets, not deficits. Greg is an advocate for persons with disabilities and delivers workshops on making the classroom, workplace, and world more inclusive to all abilities. You might have seen him at maybe a session in your district or a conference. He has been talking all over the US about these wonderful, hard-hitting topics. And while at Amplify, he founded Limitless, a resource group for employees with visible and invisible disabilities. I also have, Greg, my Limitless hat, because so we are ready to go today. All right, and with that, I will kick it over to Greg to get started.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. And thanks everyone for joining today. Yeah, I'm just kind of keep my eye on where you guys are from. And I'm so happy you've joined. And we're going to talk about asset-based assessment. And it's good for everyone, but we're going to focus on, obviously, the good it does for those who traditional assessment can sometimes and often leave on the outside. The big things we're going to cover today: what it is about traditional assessment that falls short, what asset-based assessment reveals that traditional often does not, and also the impact it can have on instruction. This is a little thing we're going to fill out together as we go, where we're going to compare the two. But to get started, I want to just tell a very quick story. I wish this story weren't true, but it is. I am someone, and maybe I have some friends joining me today. I am someone who every single January 1st, I make the same New Year's resolution. It usually lasts about 3 days, okay? I could probably let you guess what it is. And every year, I go on a diet around January 1st. And here's the deal. I estimate that I've purchased about 50 books like the ones you see here. And I'm totally being honest. I'm no good at following anything about what they say, but as a teacher, I'm pretty good at book reports. So I can tell you what they say to do. Following it is another thing altogether. But here's the thing, and it's just amazing how many of these there are. Despite this, if you change the conversation to say, well, how do they define success? How do they measure their effectiveness? Despite all of these different approaches, there's really only two ways. There's like two categories I would put these into how it is they say, is this working? The vast majority, I would say more than 3/4 of these, they just use a simple unit rate. In other words, they reduce everything to a number. They do that with this thing. Okay. I hate this thing. And I'll tell you why. I hate this thing because it gives you a number and it's not really giving you the whole story. Okay, here's what I mean by this. This thing, I've had some of my best weeks when I've been, a couple times I've been very sick. I had a bad flu. At the end of the week, this thing was figuratively saying to me, "You're doing great. God, you got to keep it up." And it doesn't really factor in anything about me, how I'm different. It says, nope, nope, nope. I'm just going to make you a number, and that number is going to tell us how you're doing. I ask myself a lot if we do this in education. I would argue that we do. We put so much effort into making our classrooms engaging, asking ourselves, are we student-centered? How are we, what modalities are we doing to reach learners? But then if we do summative assessment like this, we are just reducing students to a number. And just like the scale, it's not a number that's telling a complete story. So I said earlier that about 3/4 of the approaches will just use a standard unit rate. What about the others? Well, the others will say it's not that numbers don't tell a story. They do, but they certainly do not tell the whole story. If we're willing to look and we're willing to go beyond that, we can learn a lot more. So in these examples, at the end of the week, they would say things like, let's look back on our week and let's look for a time. Let's identify a time where we, figuratively went the long way. We walked, we, took the stairs rather than the elevator. Let's look back in our journal and say, when were we confronted with the opportunity to make a bad decision and we made a good one? Where can we circle things we can do better next week? Maybe we order something and the person says, that comes with a salad or fries. I don't know what happens when you say salad. I've never done that. I presume they bring you a salad. But the idea is here, it's that we're cultivating and developing behaviors in addition to just looking at numbers. We can also do this in education. We can say, yes, numbers tell a story, but they don't tell the whole story. And if we're willing to do a little bit of work and, kind of look a little deeper, we can learn a lot more about our students and where they are. And as importantly, maybe more importantly, we can learn where do we go from here to help our learners move forward. So just like the scale, I think there is absolutely life beyond that standard unit rate number. And we can use assessment and we can learn more than just the green check or the red X. So with that as a jumping off point, I want to just start by looking at something here. And whenever I have an example, I'll have the grade in the corner of the screen where you're seeing that. So this is a grade 5. I'm going to use released questions from state-based, high stakes math assessment here. What's the largest? We're going to be given a set of numbers. What's the largest number in the set? We've got 4 options, 2 of which are combinations of numbers, 2 of which are individual numbers. You can kind of see visually why they probably selected 26 and 79, because a student may read that and say, oh, okay, I'm seeing two sets of numbers there. And in some way, the selection of 26 and 79 being A and B might be something that the student might say, oh, okay, 26 or 79. In other words, that possible response is actually guiding their thinking here. I want to look at how different a similar standard question would be if we looked from a very different lens. So if we go beyond the check and the X, we're going to read a little question here. Ellie measured the heights of sunflowers in her garden. The heights are represented in the line plot. What's the height of the tallest sunflower in the garden? So I've got a couple of things happening here. I've got a visual. At the bottom, I've got the picture of sunflowers. Then I've got my number line, and I've got obviously dots representing the heights of sunflowers in her garden. Now, probably as educators, the very first thing you saw or said is that, oh, a student is going to think, some students, I should say, are going to think that those dots represent individual flowers and heights. So a student might say, okay, we've got a sunflower that's 5 units, we've got one that's 3 units, we've got a couple that are 1 and one that's 2. This very much goes back to what is the question asking? It's asking us, what's the highest number of this set? And what does that number represent? The height of the tallest sunflower in the garden. So a couple of things are happening here. We're finding out if the student can really process the question. Can they read a graph? Are they confusing frequency with value? If there is one that is 9 feet, does it matter how many are 6 feet? Do they connect that to measurement? And so a student who answered incorrectly, of all the possible incorrect answers, my position would be if a student answered 6, that would tell us the most about what students were thinking. And that would, you could kind of see, okay, I think it's possible I know where the disconnect is, and that may be very different for more questions. So one of the things we're going to think about with traditional assessment here is that it tends to reveal right versus wrong, and there's certainly more out there and more happening than that. Okay. What is it about traditional assessment that can fall short? Okay, well, I think if you're a certain age, it's possible you have like just a reaction to seeing this thing. So assessments that involve this, they tend to do a few things. We're going to get to the fact that they're just not made for all learners, but they actually tell us more about what we don't know than what we do. And I think that it's very possible everyone can relate to, if you're a certain age, you can relate to having, I don't know, approximately a 45-minute class in middle school or maybe high school, I don't know. The class was only 45 minutes, and you took a summative assessment in this format where there was 100 questions. That's obviously, you're going through at a rate more than, you're going to have to do more than a question a minute. The reason why you need, in many cases, that needed to be done is because these questions identified so little that you needed so many of them to get a picture of something like a chapter or a unit made up of many chapters. So if you had to do a look back, a benchmark, a summative look, you had to ask a lot of these questions. Obviously, when we do this, we're living in a binary world where things are either right or they're wrong. probably the thing that's not as obvious, but is certainly as important, is that when we live this way, we are doing this at the end of a chapter, of a thing. Like, in other words, not a chapter in the traditional textbook, but like, we're moving on the next day after this. We're starting something new. So the point is, when we get the data back from this assessment, there's no going back. And I want to go back to this image for 1 second. I'm a neurodiverse person. I have many learning differences, and I can tell you, when you have attention issues, when you struggle with executive functioning and attention, if you're taking an assessment like this, your primary source is either a screen, perhaps, or it's, a paper or a packet, the test in front of you, and then the sheet, the Scantron, is next to it. When you constantly have to focus on the question and then kind of go over here, refocus on this, find the number, remember, okay, did I say A, B, or C, and go back? It is amazing how taxing that is on someone with attention challenges. So I think it's possible there's even more reasons that students can struggle with this that have nothing to do with, do I know the content of this assessment? There's one more thing to think about when we assess that way. Think about how you study for an assessment administered that way. Okay, it's almost always, text, paper, and pencil. We're going to bubble in our answers. Because it's this way, it's most often simply multiple choice, true or false. What my assertion is that this is not telling us how much Greg or whoever knows about math. It's a referendum on, can Greg memorize? Let's say the assessment's on Friday. This is a referendum on, repeat back to me what your text or your teacher said between Monday and Thursday. So there are very specific types of learners who will do fine. There are very specific types of learners who will create a sheet like you see on the left side of the screen. They will say, I know what I'm going to be tested on, and I'm going to just get this down. It's going to go into my head. I'm going to be able to repeat it when I'm asked these back. So let's look at a kindergarten example. I almost didn't believe this was actually on a state released questions, a state's released questions. Which number is less, 3 or 4? If you have a language-based learning disability, the way the word less followed by a comma going into 3 or 4, that's staggering to me. Which number is less? I could imagine a student wondering, even if this was read aloud, would this necessarily mean I'm taking 3 away from something? It's which number? It's looking for a smaller number, 3 or 4, both are equal. It's just like we chronicled for the traditional assessment. Black text on white paper totally lacks context. Students only have text, goes back to that core category of it's binary. The child either knows the smaller or the larger number in something like this. Nothing about misconceptions. Look at this alternative to it. Choose the building that is shorter. Now, a couple of interesting choices were made in these images. The shorter one has more windows. That would be noticed by a student who's more visual, and that the shorter one is wider as well. So with that as context, this is more accessible for all learners. So our English learners, the idea of putting math into a picture, it's possible that questions along this way could reveal misconceptions. We'll have better examples of this when we go forward, but clearly, obviously, in education, we hear in many subjects, we hear bringing the real world in helps, okay? This, in a sense, is bringing a real world into that type of question. Here's a grade 3 example. And I want to look at the standards specifically for this one, because I got asked a question very recently when I was just having a talk with a teacher. And so in this one, we're asked to select the shape that is partitioned into thirds. This is grade 3. One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, I've got one option that's broken into 4 fourths and one that's broken into 3. I've got 2 that are broken into thirds. So what I wasn't necessarily expecting is a teacher asked me, like, wow, that word partitioned it's a little bit of a big word for 3rd grade. And so when you look this up, and yes, I know we have people from everywhere. These are the national standards I'm looking at. The word partition or partitioning, it appears 7 times in the grade 3 standards. Okay, so generally speaking, when something is on an assessment and the question, and your question is, why is that here? The answer is almost always see the standards. And it is clear that this is part of what we want student thinking to be. So select the shape that is partitioned into thirds. If we imagined, now I don't have a released question to show this, so this is me saying, what would this look like in that traditional format? Well, you could do multiple choice. You could say, how many equal parts? You could make it true, false. It could be a fill in the blank even. So a shape divided into blank equal parts is divided into thirds, things like that. So this idea of there is a big difference between just knowing my student got, 17 of 30 students got this question wrong. Okay. Okay, well, there's a lot of ways to get this question wrong. I would want to know how many people selected this versus this, or how many people left it blank. There's so much we can learn from that. So a couple more things to reflect on here. Generally speaking, that traditional assessment, it's like we said, it's going to reveal right versus wrong. It's focusing as much on what they don't know, and asset-based, it's going to give us an opportunity to focus on how they think as well. And that thinking, it's not always going to be visible, but it's almost always going to be invisible when we're looking at that traditional approach, that simple Scantron and those possible ways we looked at that. So I think there's opportunities here to talk about what asset-based assessment can possibly reveal when we go beyond just right and wrong. Okay, this doesn't show up on the actual page in terms of like when we're going to break down the questions, but the number one answer on the board is time. When you can get more than one piece of information from a question, you can ask fewer questions. When you can ask fewer questions, you are probably doing the greatest service for students with executive functioning challenges, for students with attention challenges. Everyone has taken a test where simply fatigue set in and you weren't you weren't as present for question 40 as you were for question 4. So it also allows us to go beyond correctness and to focus on strategies, misconceptions, and the most important thing in one teacher's opinion is the process. How did we get there? And I think it plants seeds of there's multiple ways to learn. Like go back to the universal design for learning. There's more than one way to learn. There's more than one way to demonstrate what I've learned, and there's more than one way to work through that process. Yeah, I'm seeing a great question here. How do you balance getting more without trying to ask too much for each question? I actually think we'll reveal a little bit. We'll talk a little bit that. I'm going to let that question, Kit, thank you for that. I'm going to let that guide me a little bit through this one. So if we look at a question like this, it's asking us to choose 2 shapes that have 4 sides. Okay, we know that there's 2 shapes in here that have, no numbered sides, like in compared to having 4. We have 2 with 3 and we have 2 with 2. I'm sorry, we have 2 with 3 and we have 2 with 4 sides. It's so important. I would think the whole part of the benefit of this would be lost if the second 4-sided shape was another rectangle. So we're letting students process this visually. So there's multiple entry points, and we've right away, the visuals, counteract a little bit of the language load. Okay, so we're thinking not just English learners benefit, there are a lot of students benefit here. One of the things that dyslexic students excel at, one of their clear assets, and research shows this, is their ability to identify visual patterns, to see patterns. So in ways, asking a question like this is going right at the strengths of a diverse learner. Now, if the student only selected the option here, the rectangle, that would reveal quite a bit as well, okay? Does a student see it just as that, or do they understand that a shape can have 4 sides and look quite different from another shape with 4 sides? So we're starting to, have a little bit more information. Here's one. This one is, I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this one. There's a lot happening here. So before we even get, and you've probably scanned the question already, when I say number line, you're working with students on a number line. The visualization most people tend to have would be horizontal. Horizontal, and it would probably be left to right. One of the greatest resources that we're obviously focusing on math right now. Helping students understand math, especially when it comes, this is more so for number value and specifically positive and negative number values, more so than fractions. It works with fractions, but a little more complicated, is to use vertical number lines, is to use the understanding. And when you're using a vertical number line, and when you are talking about the value of positive and negative numbers, I love the analogy of the water line, of just the ocean. We've got sky above it. We've got underwater below it. Where would the dolphin be? Where would the pelican be? So we're thinking up and down. If you were to ask, if you were to ask an elementary student which number is larger or higher, -4 or -40, that's actually a very difficult question. When you're using that vertical number line and you're using another piece of reasoning, when you're connecting to something like an animal or perhaps temperature. If you instead said to a student, would you rather go outside for recess when it's 4 below or when it's 40 below? Many more students would get that question. They would understand the difference. Oh, okay, 4 below is way closer to 0. So in this question, a seagull is flying 50 feet above the surface of the ocean. Directly below the seagull, a pelican is there, flying 17 feet above the surface. Below the birds is a dolphin swimming 20 feet below the surface of the ocean. There's a lot going on here. What's the difference between, I'm so sorry, what's the distance between the seagull and the pelican? So I would love for you to throw in the chat here. Where might a misconception, what kinds of mistakes might a student make when they're starting to reveal it here? And I see, let me just use this here. I see Christopher's question, and it's a good one. Why include the dolphin statement if it's not relevant to the question? That's a great point, Christopher, but I would ask you this. If you go to whatever state you live in and you're able to get, most states have this, if you just take released questions from high stakes tests, if you ask that question, why would you include this if it's not relevant? You would have a lot of marks on almost every question. When you're writing a set, when questions are written for a high stakes assessment, they're essentially not even hiding the fact that they're trying to, trip up students. I mean, that's a tactic used where we're going to give them lots of data and we're going to see if they're, if they're able to, when I work with students, I call it doing an autopsy of the question, saying, forget the answer. Let's just see if we can agree on what it's asking us. So I think that's a great point. But this is going to happen, okay? That it gives this real world context. And first of all, it makes a connection to seeing math vertically. So it's going to things like difference, sum. Are we going to use the words we're given and then kind of see that in that number line? I would say 100% this supports more learning styles than what's 50 minus 17. It absolutely does that. And I'm so sorry, the chat's moving too fast for me to remember the name. Someone said not every student will look at this. While that's true, for too often that's been used as a reason not to try and make anything in the world, in academics, more inclusive. Meaning, why would I make this graphic if not all of my students need it? Because some of your students need it, because some would benefit from this. And what I think, when I talk to teachers and when I work with students, I think we have become so visual, not just the students that need this because they simply can't match a student to their left and their right, who don't need it but still might benefit from it. Here's one from grade 8. This one is showing us a scaled copy. It's saying the triangle we see on the top and the one we see on the bottom are scaled copies of one another. Okay, so it's asking us the length of line LN. What would a possible common error for the value of LN be in terms of moving from the top triangle to the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, we've got RQ and we've got NM. We have a value here. Yeah. So what could easily happen is someone could say, okay, well, on the top, we started with 5 and we got to 11. If we start on 15, are we adding 6? So I think Bonnie and one other person may have done that. I'm sorry if I missed someone else. If you see the answer 21, you might say, okay, they see the relationship. They're using the wrong strategy. They're using the wrong, they're adding rather than, do they understand when we say scaled copies here? So they may add or subtract instead of multiplying or dividing. They may mismatch sides. This is a problematic question for many students with dyslexia, especially, and please, I hope if you ever see something like this, I want you to look for this, especially if it's an assessment you didn't write. In other words, like you're probably, if you're writing the assessment, you would probably be aware of this. If we look at this, it's amazing how many testing, test writers will say, let's compare QP to LM. And in other words, not using a consistent way to define a line, left to right or right to left. A student could easily be tripped up by comparing QP to LM. Well, why would it go that way? If it goes this way, why wouldn't it go this way here? So there's so much happening here that can inform that we can look at here. So we have shorter, more efficient questions that are in many cases are giving us multiple insights. And we're starting to see that it's possible to reveal strategies behind how did we get there. And you can see in some cases, you'll be able to see this. We're going to look at what a report would look like in a second here. You're going to see a little bit more about strategy. So going back to what we talked about with, me getting on the scale every January 1st. One type of assessment is going to give us something that looks like what you see on the left. It's going to say, here you go. You got X number of students. Here's where they fall. Here are the standards. But it's not that we get rid of that, but when we combine student thinking and next steps, we might see something like this. And obviously, these are not real names. We're not looking at real data. We can see on a Scantron report, we can see how many students got our question right, how many students did not get our question right. But then we can get difference. Even if you just start with, of your students who did not get this question correct, don't you want to know how many students left it blank? Don't you want to know how many students added instead of multiplied, incorrectly added or subtracted? All of these different categories they can fall into. This is where we're starting to get in the idea of, oh, okay, we can actually this can inform instruction. This can kind of give us a big picture of where we need to go in the class. So I love focusing on the potential for this to have impact on instruction. Now, this is way too many words on the slide. So when we go big picture here, and we'll look at examples in a second, this idea that assessment can become something that can impact what's happening, what as a teacher I'm prepping. So it really is becoming a tool for supporting growth rather than just saying, this is the end, the new marking period starts Monday, I'm going to do this benchmark or I'm going to do this summative assessment. you're going to do well, you're not going to do well. Either way, we're starting a new thing on Monday. Okay. This is more likely to give us data that can really impact what we're doing. When we shift back a little bit to formative assessment, it's actually going to be something that helps students get ready to take summative assessments. One of my favorite things to do is to take whatever summative assessment I can get that the students are, I don't know why I just looked over there like the students were there, that the students are working towards to the end of the year. And I like to just cut those up into individual pieces of paper, like one question on page. And periodically throughout the year, we're going to do that test question autopsy. We're going to dissect it. We're going to say, what is this asking? Forget about, do we know the answer? I want to work on just learning how to read this and how to interpret what this is asking. That goes back to that great comment we had earlier. Why would we put data in there that's not relevant to the answer? It's such an important skill to have. So, developing that is important. It brings us closer to having a focus where we have students who think differently, who process differently. They're going to bring those different approaches to the assessment. So let's not assess in that one size fits all. And it's actually going to make assessment reflect our learning more so. Okay. Spent a lot of time in kindergarten today, but I think that's important. We're going to hit a couple other grades too. We've got 16 flowers here, and we're asking students to choose 12. You could essentially determine if a student knows 12, place value, the value of the number, lots of things about it, many different ways. What can this reveal? If we say this, if we see the ones the student selects, is it as simple as, do they know 12 or do they not know 12? Well, things that might be revealed is how they organize, how they're kind of thinking and counting here. Are they going one by one? Are they skip counting? Some of that may impact, a teacher looking at the curriculum or what is coming next, how they're going to implement this, and it's going to give them a little bit of a window into what the students, what methods that students are using. So it's visual, it's nonverbal, and it's just, generally speaking, it's allowing more learners to have an entry point here. So there's quite a bit going on. I really like this example from second grade too. In this example from second grade, we're given the visual of a ribbon. We're given a piece of information that it's 32 inches long. The ribbon is cut into two pieces. The first piece that's cut is 3 inches long. The students are thinking about that other piece. Compared to our question with the distance between the two animals, we're probably thinking horizontally here. And some of that is obviously influenced by the image here. A ribbon is 32 inches long. It's cut into two pieces. How long is the other piece? Students are probably, if you were to have a conversation with the students after the assessment, take me through how you did this. This is an opportunity where you're really going to get to see their approach. Is it pure subtraction? Is it counting backwards? Did they visualize this? Where did we miss this here? So again, probably not the first thing you're thinking, but it also has that real world focus. What I mean by that, it's called material reasoning, when students are able to it's not just math, take anything and try and envision something physical, and they see, okay, I've got one piece that's 3 and the total is 32. That second piece is way bigger. That number is going to be way bigger than 3. And even if they started kind of like a guess and check method, and that's going to be something that's going to reveal a little bit there. This one is one where we're going to see vertical and horizontal almost come together. Pretty simple one in the sense of what is the distance between points A and C. So I'm just going to give everyone a time. I'm sorry. I think I may have said, what's the difference? I have a language-based learning difference. I saw that the second time that it's distance. What is the distance between points A and C? Boy, that is a big difference in question. So I would love it if anyone here has what they think a misconception might be. Yeah. They might give a negative answer. There's a lot of things that they can do. This is another great example. If we go back to what information are we giving them, is B and D in some way going to, is that going to influence? As a student might a student say, well, if I have to go, 4 over to get to B, and then I, go another 4 down to get to D. One of the places I went is, would this question be different if A and C were the only two? Meaning, and you probably would call them A and B, but just imagine these aren't here. How does that question look in that scenario? So do they use a distance formula? They're probably, yeah, Christopher, what if they thought they had to go from A to B to C? Are they, how is that visual impacting, the visual we're looking at here? We're going to learn things like positive and negative, absolute value. Can we tell if they're counting units? So there are a lot of approaches we can see here. Actually, we're going to look at one with a student response in just a second here. But this idea of, we tend to look at these things as educators and go right to the process. But when we think about, well, what about a student who that doesn't make any sense to and they do a totally different way? We're seeing, we're seeing that student to have a place here. So I think that it's just doing something for the culture of my classroom where it is clear we have different neurotypes. We process information very differently. We have different assets. We have different things that we find challenging, and there tends to be a little bit more opportunity here. There's a couple of examples I like here that have a little bit of student work. Tree frogs are amazing jumpers. A tree frog started at 0 and jumped 6 feet. Then it jumped 7 feet. What's the total distance the frog jumped? We're going to reveal, well, okay. I wanted to give you a little more time. I clicked that a little soon. Okay, in this student's answer, they gave the answer of 14 feet. And when we look at what the student did, the student showed us their counting. They showed us that they saw it was 6 feet and then 7 feet. We see that they ended up on 14. And then we see, yes, we see the student started at 1. So there is, this is revealing that the student actually did a lot right in this question. They jumped 6 feet and they actually changed the color, showing the difference. Here's jump 1, here's jump 2. And it doesn't look like the student added 6 and 7. the student said, okay, the question's asking me the total difference. The total difference would be, where am I ending up? The total distance. I'm so sorry. You're seeing me have a language-based learning difference in real time. And I guess I'm kind of demonstrating how challenging this could be for someone. But so the student is, you could see the student thinking they're doing the right things here. And they're saying, well, this is where I ended up. So the starting point was 1, not 0. It's not necessarily a lack of addition skills. But when we gave this physical representation, what if the frog jumped backwards? Great. No, that's a great point, Janet. The teacher can now reinforce 1-to-1 on the number line rather than, yeah, I love that point. The idea of partial credit. Think about the difference, and I know this is such an obvious example, but think about the difference between a student who left this blank and a student who answered 14, and us seeing this work. We can actually kind of like see how the student got there. So it gives the teacher something to really work with here. These ideas of assessment falling short, revealing more, and having an impact on instruction are kind of like the big picture here. So I want to do a little quiz here. And I want to see if we can look at the old and the new. And because I want to, reward you with something here. The good news is, if you get this correct, you're going to choose between fries and a salad. Choose carefully. I know what I'm choosing. Okay. So if I asked you this question, do you think that this type of assessment is worth exploring? If I was going this route, I can probably say it is, it isn't, I don't know, or I don't even. Okay, you could answer this way. But what if I tried to ask this question? By the way, I love that you guys are answering this. I wouldn't have predicted that. I didn't predict that. But what if I tried to ask you this question? What would this look like if I asked you this in a way that was not as binary as this? We liked it, we didn't like it, I don't know. What if it looked like this? In what ways could this type of assessment potentially impact your district or your students? You can choose to focus on growth, insight, instruction, equity. And you can bring more to this answer. There's no wrong answer here. When we build a question like this, a student is really showing us, wow, I'm thinking at such a higher level here. And we're even giving prompts. This could help more voices be heard. This could connect assessment more directly to teaching. So this is a little bit of an example of trying to think about something like that. How does this work? Where do we go from here? The good news is I'm not going to ask any of you to get on the scale. I'm not getting on the scale because we're more than our numbers. Your students are more than just how many out of 100 Scantron questions did they bubble correctly or not. You have a lot of students that will do fine no matter how you assess. My position is the number of students that we can say that about tends to get smaller every cluster, every group or generation or group of years, whatever. When we can try to bring, there's been so much effort that's gone into bringing equity to teaching. Let's look at the learning styles. Let's understand students have learning differences. That having this conversation, having this look at how we assess, instruction was always going to happen first in that conversation. But the fact that we're looking at assessment here is really, really important. What I want to do now is I want to ask Shannon if she will tell us more about when we could. Shannon, you told me about when there is another one, and I have no idea what month it's in. I've forgotten about 30 seconds after you told me.
Another webinar?
Yeah. Isn't there where they can learn more about
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So there is another webinar for assessment week this afternoon at 4. And then there is one tomorrow at 4 that is really diving into Amplify's assessment program that kind of unpacks more the specific sampling, reporting, and types of assessments that you can see in an asset-based assessment program. So thank you, Ryan, for dropping that in the chat. So if you are interested, tomorrow's session at 4, it's on the same registration page as the other webinars, but that is a good one for where you can really see some of these sample items in practice and what they look like and how students might answer them. But thank you, Greg, so much for coming today. This was very helpful. I love that we were able to continue the story about asset-based assessment and what it means for all learners, not just our neurotypical, but also kids who do not speak the same math language as some of our other students. And we did have a couple questions. I know
Sure.
Every time I say that, then 5 more pop up in the Q&A. So I have that pulled up too. But one person asked, is there anything parents can do at home to help their children in preparation for assessments, regardless of if it's asset-based or not? For some of these standardized tests, what are some things outside of school that students could do?
One very specific thing. When I talk like this in a lot of states, almost every state, if you go on their DOE site, they have released questions where you can see questions on last year's test. It's this simple. Encourage parents, tell them that they're there, okay? Let them take a look at them and ask this one simple question. Talk to your children, I guess in this example, it's happening at home. Talk to your children and saying, what is this asking you? What is this question asking you? I'm going to tell you what I think it's asking me. I'm going to tell you where I think they did something that kind of confused me. Just like verbalizing that and even sharing vulnerability, saying, oh man, I remember this when I was in your grade. I used to say, why are they asking this question this way? That's so oddly worded. So just like verbalizing that this is a process is like a very big first step. I'm just such an advocate for do something with the questions they're releasing to you, okay? The next year's questions, it doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, okay? It's gonna give you a lot of hints about what's coming.
And another question that came in, do you know of a website or an online resource that has math stories for K-5 math? And I know that Amplify Desmos Math has different stories and narratives within it. And Ryan and I have actually, our team's been working on seeing how we can get some of those stories out to the masses that aren't just customers. But are there any existing resources? I didn't know of any, but Greg, do you?
This is one thing I want to say about that. I know that we all have different feelings about AI, specifically in education. I'm in a circle of a lot of educators, especially neurodiverse educators, who are looking at how to use AI to help. If you put something as sterile as I'm having trouble coming up with an analogy or a story for subtracting fractions for a diverse learner, I have seen so many examples of amazing things that AI will return. If you enter something like that and put a grade level, you can even put individual standards, and it will say, try this analogy, try this story. Obviously, you're going to vet that and you're going to see if you think it passes mustard. But I think that's worth a look.
I didn't even think about that. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's anything in the chat. All right, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to go to additional resources and also look for the few that are going to pop in inevitably. If there are K-5 teachers here or someone who does teach literacy and math, we have our literacy kind of counterpart to this series next week, Comprehension Connections, Building the Bridge Between Reading and Understanding. Susan Lambert will be there, which is always exciting. So definitely check out amplify.com/fall SOR webinars if you are interested in what this looks like on the literacy side of things. And then more math resources. So make sure that you register for our other webinars. We have an educator panel today at 4 talking about using PLC time to make a strong MTSS for math and literacy. And then we have that M-Class demo tomorrow with Kelly Serpa-Howe, who is always a really fun and energetic presenter. You can grab your own copy of our asset-based assessment ebook to dive more into this topic. And we also have more professional learning resources for you to use this year. And you can always explore more free PD opportunities and webinars at amplify.com/math webinars. All right. And that is my spiel. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Greg. Always so happy to have you here. So thank you, and everyone have a good rest of the week.